All right, maybe we should start. The room looks like it's getting filled up, but I don't want to run out of time on the back end. So Nick, do you want to kick it off?
Yeah, let's do it. All right. Good morning, good day, depending on where you are. Thank you all for joining us today. My name is Nick Sargent, and I'm the president of SIA, your association to help the winter outdoor industry thrive. We're hosting Town Hall Thursdays while we're all safe at home in an effort to keep you informed, answer your questions, and to keep the community engaged. We firmly believe that opening the lines of communication and collaboration will be key to navigating these challenging times. Our goals with the town halls are to provide a forum for cooperation, sharing best practices and ideas, as well as answer your questions. In addition, as I've mentioned before, we have also launched the SIA Industry Hub on our website for the most up-to-date resources and tools, including financial resources. Go to snowsports.org/COVID hub. This page is updated daily, so please check back often. You can also find the winter community on our Facebook group, accessible from the Industry Hub as well. This is a communication point for all of us to trade ideas, best practices, and answer questions. Today's town hall, the U.S.-China trade war, everything you need to know. This is the 7th in our series. I want to introduce Joseph Brubaker, a lawyer with Kirton McConkie, who is an international business, trade, and tariff specialist. We'll kick off the presentation with Joseph that will provide an overview and update on the current tariff situation. He'll focus on the areas that SIA members should be particularly aware of now. Then we'll spend some time answering your questions, some of which have been sent in advance. Thank you for those. We'll answer as many as we can in the time allotted. So to ask a question, pretty simple. Just type it in to the Q&A section on your desktop, and we'll answer them in the order that they were received. And we'll get to as many as we can, as I mentioned. Thank you again for joining, and let us kick this over to Joseph. Thank you, Joseph.
Nick, thank you. It's a pleasure. It's always a pleasure to collaborate with the Snowsports Industries America. I love what you do. I am a Utah native who graduated from the University of Utah before studying law in New York at Columbia, studying more law at Cambridge in England, and then practicing half my career in DC. But I had to come back to the mountains and to the slopes. In fact, this morning, my son showed me a picture of how you can go mountain biking down the slopes and showed a fancy YouTube video in that regard. Well, it's a pleasure to talk about the tariffs. I want to emphasize 2 points at the beginning. One, I am not giving legal advice, but am giving you a legal overview of what's going on. In that regard, I am not a politician, but I have a pretty good idea of where the policy is headed in this regard. The other item I wanted to mention is I would like to answer as many questions as you have. I've already been provided some questions, and I will start there as to where we are and where we're going next with the U.S.-China trade war. Before I answer some questions, well, let's start with the question that seems to be on everybody's mind. What do we do about exclusion requests? And what do we do about continuing those that are going to expire this coming year? One person asked in particular, what's our best strategy for getting our exclusion request to extend? It's been actually a little bit confusing and not easy to access because they've been processing exclusion request extensions on a rolling basis, although the main one just came out last Friday. And they are looking at 3 specific things. Can you get this product somewhere else other than China? This has come up for one of my clients. One of my clients is in the snow sports helmet industry. And that's something that's been on their mind. A second thing they want to know is, has your global supply chain changed? What have you done to try to get your products somewhere else? Unlike helmets, where pretty much all the helmets in the entire world come from China, other products may not have that. There may be more opportunities in Vietnam or Mexico or elsewhere. The third thing they want to know is, what have you done to try to become less dependent upon China? And those are the 3 factors they're looking at. And to give you some context, about 2 months ago, former Senator Orrin Hatch got the U.S. Trade Representative, Ambassador Lighthizer, to come here to Salt Lake City and to speak with some of us. over lunch. And during that lunch, I asked him, I said, what do we tell all of these companies? And his answer was not particularly optimistic. He said, basically, it comes down to one issue. Can they source it somewhere else? If they can't, we're going to look at it hard, and maybe we'll grant the exclusion. The concern I have in this regard is that over the period of several years, they may continue to try to ask this question: what have you done this year to get out of China? What have you done next year to get out of China? What have you done the third year to get out of China? So that seems to be the main question they're looking at. The other thing that they've mentioned as a big strategy factor is they're looking at, will it severely harm US interests or US companies? It's an election year. President Trump and his administration want to reduce the risk of bankrupting companies because they want to keep voters, to be blunt. And so that's a consideration. But in that regard, something else that's come out of that is they just started granting a few exclusion requests for COVID-19 response. So if your product has anything to do with medical considerations, even though the explicit criteria don't address that, you should add that in as a reason for why the existing exclusion request should be extended. So that gives you an overview. The good news is the government has made it easier to file these comments to extend the exclusion requests. They have an online process now at exclusions.ustr.gov. It's way more user-friendly than it was about a year ago, and they tell you all the information they want. One of the biggest disconnects that has happened with the exclusion requests is they look at your company and your company's finances to see whether or not an exclusion request should be granted. But then when they actually grant the exclusion request, they grant it to everybody with a similar product. And it's a disconnect because one wonders, why does one particular company financial data matter so much in giving or extending an exclusion? But nonetheless, that's the process they set up. For example, I had a client that I prepared an exclusion request for, and we were very careful in how we drafted the product, such that when they granted the exclusion request, it could really only apply to one product. And that's been interesting because their competitors were not able to take advantage of the same exclusion request because their products are millimeters different in size. So that's an interesting strategy going on here as well. Someone has asked, okay, where do we think these exclusions and these tariffs are going? I'm seeing one question already. What is the likelihood of tariffs from the previous list in 2019 being reinstated? This is an interesting question because of what's been happening politically over the last week. In the current election cycle, President Trump has decided to make China, a Chinese policy, a key issue in getting reelected. One way he's doing that is, in the last election cycle, the argument was China has stolen all of our manufacturing and therefore hurt America. Now it's China's fault that we're all suffering from COVID-19, and therefore we need to punish China for that. And that's one of his strategies. And the question is, how is he going to punish China? Over the weekend, he threatened the idea of reimposing the tariffs. So if you recall, the list 4 tariffs were cut in half. The tariffs that were supposed to go up to 30% for 25%, that never happened. He actually floated that over the weekend of putting all the tariffs back, which spooked quite the market and spooked quite a few people. And so there is a possibility of that happening. My guess is that will not, my speculation I should say, is that will not happen, that the tariffs will stay where they are for now. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One, the US imports from China have dropped. And so increasing the tariffs doesn't do as much harm as it could have before. Second, the tariffs and the whole goal of the deal that the US and China reached in January was to encourage China to buy more US products. And so to just punish China for the sake of punishing China for this COVID-19 doesn't really give the US much of a victory. And the third thing that's hard is that with the dramatically shrinking GDP of the US, it's a hard time to increase tariffs. So my guess is that the tariffs are going to remain exactly where they're at for the remainder of the year. They'll neither go up or down. On the one hand, President Trump does want to increase China as the bad guy and villainize them. But on the other hand, increasing tariffs doesn't help him win any political capital. So that's some thoughts on where the US-China trade war is going. I expect it to stay still. Someone else has asked, what do we think will happen if there is a different administration? What if the Democrats win this fall? My guess is that, and from what I've heard, the Democrats have not opposed what more or less not opposed what President Trump has done with these tariffs. They don't want to look like they are less favorable to US manufacturers than the Republicans. Or someone once said it, in many ways, President Trump, with his anti-China approach, has out-democrated the Democrats by arguing that he's there to help US manufacturers. That said, I don't expect Senator Biden to pick a bigger fight with China than Trump would. I expect things would probably remain status quo unless some sort of deal is resolved. I would expect a Democratic administration to probably reach a deal that might be more favorable for China, or in other words, something to get trade to work better than it has, and maybe not be as hard as the Republicans. But again, that's just speculation as to what would happen. But unfortunately, both parties are united in their opposing China's trade practices, and especially their intellectual property practices. In that regard, I think I do want to come back to what was my experience with Ambassador Lighthizer when he was here in Salt Lake City, Utah, and what he thinks is going to be the future of the US-China relationship. At that time, and admittedly, the coronavirus has changed many things in the last month alone. But at that time, his view was this. He said, quote, "I'm not Pollyanna about China." And then in talking about the phase 1 deal, he said that he did not expect that China will live up to all their commitments. So this deal that was made is already in jeopardy. Now, the most likely solution now is that both sides will agree to extend it 90 to 180 days so that because of the coronavirus. He thought that China would easily buy the US products that they agreed to do because that's easy to do. But he thought that China may not make the legal reforms that the US wants them to make to protect intellectual property. As a result, his overall view was that it'll take many years to settle on new rules with China. So one person asked, what would happen if to new duty rates? Can it just be changed with a new administration, or when do we expect it to change? This is less of a legal question and more of a lobbying question, in the sense that, yes, a new administration could change duty rates on any item pretty much at any time it wants to, and in many ways that's the business of lobbyists to affect that. Historically, trade policy in the US has not been a primary target, meaning that the harmonized tariff schedule of the United States usually changes only once or twice a year. In the last 2 years, it's changed well over 20 times. That's how quickly these tariffs are changing from product to product and from month to month even, which makes it a little challenging to follow. But it could be changed. Lobbyists spend a lot of time on this. Obviously, Congress has proposed, goodness, I want to say 10 different pieces of legislation to control the current administration's ability to change tariffs. But so far, none of those have passed. So far, it still seems to be the prerogative of the president and the US Trade Representative's office as to what rate to set these duties at. So when I had this lunch with Ambassador Lighthizer, I talked to him. I said, well, what do you want me to tell all of my clients, all of these US companies who are paying these US duties and their customers about what they should do? And this is what he admitted. I got him to admit that the exclusion request process could be sometimes subjective, but that they were trying to stop that. But then this was kind of a curious take on it, which it would be interesting to see if a Democratic administration would go with. But he basically said that companies were going through a temporary dislocation. And he says the temporary dislocation of paying the increased tariffs was fair because companies in the US who don't manufacture in the US have enjoyed an unfair benefit for many years in the United States. That's an interesting way of looking at it, that will only be decided by voters as to whether or not they agree with it. But he again reiterated the key issue was, if you can only get it from China, we're going to give people a pass. And if you're trying to move it from China, we're also going to look at it more favorably. Back to the exclusion requests. Okay. Another interesting topic that's been raised by, so what am I seeing my clients do now might be something that we could talk about. In the past with the Snowsports Industries America, I've talked about various strategies to deal with the tariffs. And one thing I'm seeing increasingly common is that clients are looking to split manufacturing, where some of the manufacturing would occur in the China, but then the product would be finished elsewhere. For example, I had a client yesterday that does half their production in China and the other half in Costa Rica. The idea is, under this principle called substantial transformation, if you substantially transform your product in another country, then you can claim that that product is no longer a Chinese product when you import it into the US. That depends upon the complexity of your product. If it has multiple stages of assembly or processing, such to where you change the name of your product or change the character of your product or change how it's used, you're going to have a better chance of that. Obviously, there are significant resources required to find a new manufacturer for even part of your product outside of China, or to invest in your own factory in that regard. So that's one thing I'm seeing. Another interesting topic that I have seen recently is some people have, instead of trying to persuade the current administration to change tariffs vis-a-vis China, it might be better to persuade the current administration to persuade China to lower its tariffs on products that come from the US. Your product may be partially manufactured in China and then finished in the US, and therefore be deemed a US product that you want to sell back into China. China's winter sports industry is growing quite quickly, and so there's maybe some new market opportunities there, but to increase those market opportunities would be to decrease China's own tariffs against products that come from outside of China, which may include your US products. So that's some strategy I'm seeing recently. There's been I have mentioned lobbying in that regard. There's been a lot of lobbying, and if you follow the news, President Trump has been very dismissive of most lobbying, unless from major donors. The infamous case is Apple managed to get exclusion requests pretty quickly compared to most people. I recently had a client where for their winter sports product, an exclusion request was granted very quickly because of some behind the scene lobbying, but again, it's tied more closely into medical, or China's the only source of the product. Okay, so I just see another question here that says, if a company has applied and received an exclusion, this has to be available to other brands. And that's correct. So if one company applies for an exclusion and they obtain it, the exclusion isn't granted to the company, it's granted for the product and however the product is described. This isn't a sports industry one, but back in December, I have a client who is in, I'm trying to think what you call it, the decoration industry. And an exclusion was granted for a certain type of Christmas light as part of the Christmas process. And it immediately, even though they had not applied for the exclusion request, they became aware of it, and it applied to one of their many types of Christmas lights. And so as a result, they could claim that exclusion. And most of the exclusions, when they're granted, are retroactive to the date that the duty was imposed, which, depending upon which list it is on, it could be back in 2018 or just back in September 2019. And so they took advantage of that exclusion. So one question that's been asked is, how do we find out what exclusions have been given? What happens is the United States Trade Representative's Office has been overwhelmed by the number of exclusion requests that have been submitted. So they are reviewing them on a rolling basis. Their first step is they want to see, did you fill out the exclusion request application properly? If you didn't, your request gets kicked out. I've had that happen to some clients who come ask me for help after the fact. The second process is they want to see okay, do we think your cause is good? Do we think we should give you the request? The third step is they want to say, okay, we have these people in customs who review products as they cross the border. Will it be easy for these customs workers to determine whether or not your product is within the exclusion or not? And if you pass those 3 steps, then they grant you an exclusion. What they've been doing is they've been granting these exclusions on a rolling basis about every other week. Whenever they have a group of exclusions they're willing to give, they publish them. The US government has a nice digest or register for publishing all of anything an agency ever does, including the USTR. And so they publish these things on every 2 weeks. And it's highly irritating, but yes, my job is to go look at them whenever they publish them and see what exclusions have been granted. There are compendiums, and the easiest way I think we're going to do this is having spoken with John, is that we're going to put this available on the Snowsports Industries America website and just update it from time to time so you can see which exclusions have been granted that might affect your product. There's thousands of products, and so I only know some of them. For one example, the one I know that really impacts is if you're in the business of making helmets that are reinforced or laminated, an exclusion has been granted for all of those helmets, which is quite nice. So to answer your question, we're just going to make the resource available on this association's website so you can look up your product and see if it's on. The alternative to this is to either, one, look through every single individual publication that comes out every 2 weeks, or the actual harmonized tariff schedule of the United States. Every time they issue a new version, it lists all the products to which an exclusion has been given. But to me, it reminds me of, sifting through mountains of paper from the 1980s. I do it all the time. Unless you do it all the time, it's quite painful. But yes, there is a list. You can see which products have been granted exclusions. Sometimes curiously, I don't think they expected to do this, but sometimes they actually grant an exclusion for the whole category, even though theoretically the exclusion is supposed to be for a subset of the entire category. And yeah, someone just recommended that we make it available in a searchable format on the association website, and we can do that. I don't see that as a problem. That would probably be your easiest way. I tend to go back and look at the official publications just to make sure that everything's correct, but we'll make it we can make it in a user-friendly format fairly quickly. All right, is there any other particular questions that anybody has? I believe I've answered the questions I received. I can talk about all sorts. Oh, actually, there is one more question someone has asked me about. The question is, okay, if you're going to spend the time and energy to relocate part or all of your manufacturing process, where is a safe place to go? I think with this administration, many people have been asking the same question because this current administration has basically picked trade fights with everybody. One safe place to go, which may or may not be cost effective for you, is to go to Mexico. The reason I mention Mexico is because the United States has already picked our trade fight with Mexico, and Canada for that matter, and we now have NAFTA 2.0, or the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, which has now finally been approved by all 3 governments. It will go into effect on July 1st. From a legal perspective, and even for the most part for a trade perspective, with the exception of certain things in the auto industry and the dairy industry and other digital services as well, it won't change a lot for importing products. It won't change how things work too much. But the good news is that we have a treaty. It could have been no treaty, which is what the current administration was pushing for a while. So now that we do have a treaty, the chance of the rules between the US and Mexico and Canada changing dramatically in the near future are very, very low. So at least we have a safe, predictable trade environment with Mexico right now. So that's one option. The other reason why you might want to look at Mexico, even if it is more expensive than other options, especially there's many options in Asia, is that the current, well, before the coronavirus, the current trend was for companies to produce new products and bring them to market faster. And you may save some time by having a manufacturer in North America as opposed to a manufacturer elsewhere. And so in that regard, that's one option to look at. Another place people are looking at is of course, is all your other manufacturers in Asia, Vietnam, Thailand, Indonesia, not so many people looking at Laos. Some looking at India, but India can be difficult in many ways, especially now that it's effectively shut down still from the coronavirus. The trouble with Vietnam, the good news with Vietnam is the US has discussed entering into a treaty with Vietnam. So it may make things easier in the future with Vietnam. The bad news with Vietnam is they're pretty much overwhelmed, as most companies first went to Vietnam. The US has done a lot of negotiating with Japan, but Japan's not exactly a cheap place to go. But to answer that question, I've seen customers go everywhere throughout Asia. It kind of depends upon what you're manufacturing, where the talent is, and who can help you. A client I was talking to yesterday is using Costa Rica because they had already had an office there, and now they need to expand their manufacturing there. Turning back to exclusions, I have a question here: are exclusions indefinite, or do they need to be eventually paid? So when each exclusion is granted, it's granted to apply for, and depending upon when it's granted, basically a 1 to 2 year period, although going forward it looks like it'll be a 1 year period after August of this year. The exclusions apply permanently to all the shipments you brought in during that period. Meaning if the exclusion applies, you don't have to pay the 25 or 7.5% increase that otherwise would have applied. The problem is that a lot of times your exclusions are granted months after you've been paying these duties. So you may have had a bunch of shipments and you've already had to pay the 25% or 7.5% or 15% increase on what you brought in. If the exclusion is then granted and applies, what you need to do is work together with your customs broker and go back and revise all of the entry forms to remove the extra 25% or the extra 7.5% or 15%, whatever the case may be. And that way you don't have to pay it, or rather you get it refunded it. It's not particularly hard to do. It's just a little time consuming, but your customs brokers should all know how to do it now very quickly and remove any duties that were paid retroactively. And so the good news is for that period of time when the exclusion was in effect, you can claim back all the duties that you may have paid, and until the exclusion expires, you can avoid paying any duties. The way they do this is instead of, so when you put the codes into the customs entry form, the codes spit out the numbers, and if it's from China, it's going to spit out the additional duty from China. What they've done at the USTR is they've created yet another code so that when you apply this 99 series code, it cancels out all the additional duties and it only applies during the time period. So it's a little bit of bookkeeping to make sure that those duties are not paid for during that time period. And the value of which will depend upon how much you paid in duties and how much you've imported. For example, I have one client that's actually, they do gloves, but apparently the way they have their supply chain work, they only import things twice a year, and lucky for them, they imported their big shipment for last year before the duties went into place. So now they're thinking, okay, what do we do for the next year? But so you may not have that many shipments, or you may have a lot. I have another client that imports millions and millions of dollars of product, and so they have to go through many, many shipment records to make sure they're not paying the duties.
Hey, Joe, this is Chris. Could you just give everybody a quick overview on what the tariff duties are for the particular lists?
Sure, let me pull it up because I feel like I don't want to get it wrong. So just to go in terms of how it worked historically, let me make sure I have my list in front of me. The US has created 4 lists of tariffs so far. The first list was really deemed at going after metals, aluminum and steel. So if your product's not highly related to that, it won't really affect you. I'm trying to think. I've seen some medical equipment get affected by that. Obviously, all the aluminum producers. That was their first battle. Their second list was related to it. They basically had to split the first list into 2, so there's 2 lists. So the first list was all about metal things, electrical machinery, mechanical machinery, nuclear reactors, aircraft. and this, before I go through the 4 lists, let me step back. The U.S.-China trade war does definitely impact pretty much everybody who imports from China now. But the real fight in the U.S.-China trade war is about who has technological and military superiority. And so when it first started, it focused on those items that could be related to superiority in military or related interests, kind of a national security concern. So the first list, let me see if I got the date. It looks like it started on July 6, 2018. And this, if you have something that's maybe electrical, you might fall into this list. The second list came later and it broadened it to oils, plastics, glass, steel products, aluminum products. And both of those were 25% additional tariffs. It was going to go to 30% because the US entered into a deal with China. It was not ultimately increased to 30%. I'm going to guess those 2 lists do not affect most of the people on this call, but I could be wrong. They just finished doing comments. No, they're still in the process of doing the last comments to extend exclusions for those lists. So there's still time for some of the products on those lists to try to get exclusions extended. The big one that really kind of rocked the US was on September 24th, 2019, when they increased 25%, basically half of all the imports from China. These duties, called the List 3 or Tranche 3 duties, affect many products for the snow sports industries America. And the idea here was not that we were worried about Chinese superiority. We just wanted to bring them to the table to negotiate with us by increasing tariffs. The US government just wants to decrease dependence upon China, period. Yes, in the political rhetoric, they say we want to be manufacturing all of this stuff in the US. The reality is they know that's not going to happen, but they just want people to be manufacturing things in many different countries. But so that's the list or tranche 3. For there, I tell people it was easier to figure out what was not affected because so many things were affected. The things that didn't fall into that category were apparel and footwear. But some of that fell into the next list, which was list 4A. They call it list 4A because originally it was list 4 and it was going to be almost everything else that we import from China. The things that we didn't import from China were child safety seats. That we did import but didn't put tariffs on, were like child safety seats and cranes, certain super medically related things. But what happened last year in September and December was 2 things. First, President Trump didn't want to ruin Christmas for everybody who celebrates Christmas in the US. So he broke the list in 2, 4A and 4B. The idea was that list 4A would have most of the things, but list of 4B would have the things that people want to buy for Christmas. Your game consoles, your shoes, your footwear, certain things like that, laptops, cell phones. Some of these things were on list 4B. The idea being that you could still shop throughout last fall for your Christmas presents without paying any additional tariff, but then the tariffs would go into effect after that. The second thing that happened is in December, the US reported that they had reached an agreement in principle with China, and therefore they never put the list 4B tariffs into effect. And so our Christmas presents will be cheap again this year so far, is the idea. So the thing that's really irritating about this is 2 things. One, the tariffs for each of the items on this 4 list start at different times. And while list 1, 2, and 3 are at 25%, list 4A is only at 7.5%. So you can have different tariff rates that start at different times. The good news is if you get an exclusion request under any list, it goes back to the start date of whatever the tariff applied. The highly irritating aspect about this is that over the last few months, if you want to extend your exclusion, the government's been doing it on a rolling basis depending upon when your exclusion request was granted. So you have to check, okay, when can I comment and beg for my exclusion to be extended? It looks like on May 1st, they opened it up for everything else on list 3, which is nice. So now before June 1st is the time to try to get your list 3 exclusion extended. But they haven't been as clear as they could have been. I think the only answer to that, Chris, is we're going to have to come back and provide a summary of this on the website so people know when the different deadlines apply.
Yep.
Because it's been done on a monthly rolling basis. I had a client, for example, 2 weeks ago panicking because they thought they only had 2 more days to comment. The good news for them was actually they were too early. They needed to wait another week before they could comment. So those are the 4 lists. Those are the different times. Now, so in the deal in January with China, the deal was to, okay, we will not increase the 25% tariff on the list 1, 2, and 3 to 30%. We'll keep them at 25. And for list 4A, which went into effect last September 1st, we'll cut it from 15% to 7.5%. And then from the list 4B, we'll just suspend it indefinitely. The idea was, okay, if China doesn't live up to this deal that we agreed in January, everything's going to snap back. We're going to increase from 25 to 30%. We're going to increase the 7.5 back to 15%. And everything else, the cell phones, laptops, video game consoles, and some clothing and products, we will now start imposing duties on them. And I think that could still happen theoretically. But as I mentioned earlier in this call, given the trauma to the US because of COVID-19, I do not see President Trump increasing these tariffs. I suspect that for his US-China trade war, he'll look for a different tool other than tariffs. There's other trade tools he could use. There's other financial ways he could pursue President Trump. So that is the 4 lists. But the short answer is you got 4 different start dates for the tariffs, different rates for the tariffs, and different timelines for when you need to request an exclusion to be extended, which is where we're at for all 4 lists. I see I got a few more questions, so let me take a look at this. Okay, someone asked about the USMCA. So I mentioned that Mexico could be a good place to go. This person rightly commented that the USMCA has a sunset provision of 16 years, meaning the treaty is only going to last for 16 years, and that it's going to be reviewed every 6 years. And so the question is, how will that affect different tariff rates? I would say generally the process of setting tariffs and the process of setting treaty are somewhat different. They don't need to be related. They could change tariffs more easily. My guess, so let me explain why this USMCA is going to expire after 16 years. As every commentator will say, the President Trump, when he negotiates a trade treaty, wants to know that he won the trade treaty. That's easy to do if you're negotiating with one person. If, like the previous administration under President Obama, you're trying to negotiate a treaty with 10 countries, it's a little harder to see if you won against every country. I'm not saying this is the right approach to negotiate or not, it's just what's happening. And so the idea was that the treaty will expire after 16 years because that way in 16 years, the US could look again at the treaty to still see if they think they're winning the trade deal and renegotiate a better USMCA or not. For example, in this last review with NAFTA, the major concern was a lot of the automobile industry had moved to Mexico. So they changed some of the rules to make it less favorable to work in Mexico and more favorable to have some of the supply chain in the US. So do I think there's a possibility that things could change at every 6-year mark when they review it, or at the 16-year mark? Yes, but unlikely. I just don't see it happening. In fact, among my other hats, I am the chair of the international section of the Utah Bar, and we brought in the lead negotiator of the USMCA. Oh goodness, I want to say it's been about a year ago. And he basically said working with Mexico was very, very easy. They agreed to what we wanted. We didn't have any major complaints. He said negotiating with Canada was extraordinarily painful because Canada didn't want to concede on anything, didn't want to play fair. And so for Mexico, I feel like the US has gotten most of it wanted. There could be major industry shifts that could change things, but the US already got what it wanted out of Mexico and doesn't appear to want to pursue other things. With Canada, there's a big fight. Some of you probably read in the news about Canada having a 380% or something like that tariff on milk products from the US. That was kind of a big fight. Let's see.
Hey, Joe, looks like there's a question in the chat room.
Okay, let me take a look at this. Okay, the first question I see on the chat room is when can we get information on the tariffs on the site? That's a question, Chris, for you and I. How fast can we get it up? We're going to aim as fast as we can, probably by next Monday, realistically. How fast can you post stuff? Information.
We can do it quickly.
So we can do that. I got a very interesting question that I need to think about that I haven't thought about, which is, what if the protest period has expired to request a refund when the exclusion was granted later? I would still try to, if you can, force a post-summary correction into the system. And if not, I would still pursue it. I think they'll give it to you, even if the protest period has expired. But that's an interesting problem. Let's see. I'm trying to think if there's anything else you want to know about. Please do let me know. I've thought through all the things that are on my mind. But let me just check a few other things, a few other strategies. One person asked, what is the procedure for changing the tariffs? And the procedure is actually fairly simple. Basically, the United States Trade Representative Office just has to print a new version, publish a new version of the tariff schedule. And so things can be changed fairly quickly and with that much time. Someone asked, in the future, if there's a different administration, what would have to be done? You don't need any legislation. There doesn't need to be any litigation. It just needs to be the agency publishing the new schedule for everybody to review. And so it's pretty straightforward. In fact, when they changed some of the tariffs because of the phase 1 trade deal with China, they actually published notice pretty much the same day. It took them about 3 to 5 days to get it in formal format to where it'd be published officially and be legally effective, but they can change the tariffs quite quickly. The next question that I'm seeing is someone said, is there a way to appeal these punitive tariffs without spending an arm and a leg? And this is a discouraging question because I think the answer is no. The cheapest option is, of course, the exclusion request or comments on exclusion request. But many industries have spent quite a bit of money lobbying, including the Snowsports Industries America, which has been successful in this regard, lobbying President Trump to change things. Some of the ones I've mentioned previously is, I think the Shoe Association had hundreds of companies get together, and President Trump just brushed it off. So it seems to be, if you can get into President Trump's inner circle, that would help. I had someone ask me for better strategies among using senators and representatives. In Utah, this may cause you to laugh. I said, yes, whatever you do, use Senator Mike Lee, but don't use Senator Mitt Romney. Let's see, I have another question.
And I'd like to just add one point on that, Joe, if I could. Talking to your senators is extremely important, and it's worth your time. So a phone call or a letter into your senator's office, whether it's the home office in Utah or whatever state you're in, or a direct call into the Washington, D.C. office really, really helps. All of those numbers and addresses are listed on the snowsports.org tariff page. And we encourage you to do that. We're also actively lobbying in Washington with a group called Americans for Free Trade. And it's a group that has pulled together hundreds of trade associations and businesses to elevate our voice in Washington on this issue. So we're actively working with them to elevate our voice to get the tariffs canceled, or more recently, a deferment on the tariffs in light of what's going on with the coronavirus. Obviously, the tariffs are an added burden to what we're already dealing with financially with the coronavirus. So we're actively working in Washington this week, last week. We just sent a letter last week to the administration to let them know what we're feeling and what we need, but we're asking them to defer the tariffs for at least 90 days. There hasn't been any action on that, but we're working hard on that, and we'll keep you posted.
Thank you. That's excellent. And I've had clients who contact us. We work with the senators and congressmen if you want us to, but you can directly is just as great in my regard. It's not quite as much legal work as more as lobbying work. I got another question about, I guess it's broadly about classifying your product and whether or not your product falls into an exclusion or not. This can be hyper technical. I'm going to go, I don't know why it's on my mind today, probably because I looked at it earlier this week, but so far an exclusion has been granted for snow helmets if they were laminated or reinforced. An exclusion has not yet been granted for snow helmets that are not described as laminated or reinforced. One of the jobs of lawyers is to figure out, what does that mean? When is a helmet laminated and reinforced and when is it not? I've extensively reviewed all of the customs cases on this issue, and it's clear to me that customs isn't that clear as to what they think they mean is a laminated or reinforced helmet and what isn't. What does it have to be laminated with? What does it have to be reinforced by? And so you may have reasons to where you may want to change the classification of your product because maybe the way you've been classifying it for the last 10 years is no longer as favorable to you, and you may have a good reason to change it to another classification. My only thought, I do not oppose that at all. I think that's a great strategy with one big asterisk, which is you need to be prepared to explain to customs why you changed it. Customs is either going to say, okay, so you've been lying to us for all these years, or you're lying to us now. Now, to step back, customs is overwhelmed right now. They're moving very slowly on everything, and you may get away with it. That's never a good legal strategy or life strategy, frankly. So you just need to be prepared to explain it, and then you may have to be prepared to reclassify things you've used a different number for in the past. So for this helmet issue, I'm like, we need to know exactly how this helmet's manufactured. And if we think it's actually reinforced or laminated and want to make that argument, then we got to be prepared to change imports we've had over the last 5 years. And so then there's a math involved there. In this case, I think it's worth it for this client. This client's decided to wait to see if they also grant an exclusion request for unlaminated, unreinforced helmets. So in short, if you change how you're classifying your product, you risk triggering a customs audit. The first thing they do is they send you a request for information. Why did you do this? If you ignore them, they start to threaten you with penalties. It's much better to work with them soon and fast. It's much better if before you make the change of how you classify your product, you have a memo somewhere in your file that explains why you did what you did so that you can respond to customs faster. Customs does have the power to penalize you if they think that your treatment of customs records was negligent or fraudulent or somewhere in between. And so I don't recommend clients usually make these changes lightly, but when you're trying to save yourself from a 25% tariff, you may want to get your ducks in a row, make the change, and be prepared to fight with customs over it. So that's something to consider. I've been very surprised, especially in the last few years, though, that customs has not caught as many things as I think they should be catching. But when they do catch you, you want to be ready to deal with it. Looking at other questions.
There's another one in the Q&A box from Sherry.
I am not, let's see. Oh, let's keep going down. Sorry, there's more down. Forgive me. Okay, on the laminated helmets, I did not pull that, but there was an exclusion granted. I want to say it was in March, where if you got laminated, I don't know if it's ski helmets or how they describe it right off, but yeah, there's an exclusion on that, and we can post that. It's for all helmets in the category, which is great. Are there exclusions for apparel and leatherware? I believe there are some. I have not looked specifically at that recently because I haven't been asked to, but we can get you the full list. I'm trying to think of, the only thing that's come to my mind obviously right now is anything to do with medical apparel. A lot of that was given an exclusion for because of the coronavirus. I don't know about in ski apparel or snow sports apparel right off, but we can post that information on the website. I got another question about what about work bags, duffels, goods, wallets? Most of those exclusion requests are still on hold. I know this because I have some clients who've requested exclusions for this. So a lot of bags were denied. And this is infuriating almost. But for my clients who are in this business, I believe that their exclusion requests were denied because their work bags were only a small percentage of their business, and therefore the US thought, okay, well, it's not going to bankrupt you, therefore we're not going to give you an exclusion request. I find that highly irritating because let me contrast it with another company. I have another company where they have one product that's 2/3 of their revenues, and they got the exclusion because it would have bankrupted them. And so it's kind of some funny logic there. But again, the only explanation I can give you is that the current administration doesn't want to alienate too many voters. Now, I should step back. I'm not trying to advocate politically one way or another. There's a great comment someone posted that they said, I think Trump just wants everybody to ski in jeans. That may or may not be true. But I'm going to leave it to you. There may be a lot of reasons besides this you would want to vote for the current administration in the fall. There may be a lot of reasons, including this, that you may want to vote for a new administration. I defer to you and your judgment in that regard. Let's see. I think we have time for a couple more questions if anybody else has any, if I hopefully haven't missed anything. This conversation has made me think about what are the chances of the tariffs changing. My view is that they're still going to hold firm where they're at. I guess the one caveat I would give is if the GDP is if the hit to the U.S. GDP and the U.S. economy is as bad as we think it is, I suppose there could be enough political pressure to reduce the tariffs. China is already suffering from their own coronavirus problems. And so with both countries suffering enough, I guess theoretically there could be a change there. I just don't see it. I was astonished that Ambassador Lighthizer basically accused every company that imports from China of taking advantage of the situation over the past few decades, and therefore they should be punished with the tariffs. That's effectively what he said, and it was kind of makes you think. And because of that commitment, then I just don't see the tariffs loosening very quickly anytime soon, especially with the over the weekend commentary that the US wants to punish China somehow because of the coronavirus. And so unfortunately, I do kind of expect the status quo to go. I do hope, however, that the exclusion requests are all extended because of the GDP concerns we have right now. I do hope that they're all granted for another year very quickly and very easily. As I mentioned at the very beginning, however, they do want you to provide some sort of an explanation of what you've tried to do to become less dependent upon China. And so you need to say something. I have some clients who say, well, we looked at 2 or 3 other places. And I have some clients that say, we looked at everybody, whoever manufactures this stuff worldwide. Hopefully we're at least somewhere in between the two in the comments to extend exclusions. So this will be an interesting thing to watch because when China misses its due dates for the phase 1 deal, it'll be interesting to watch how the President Trump's administration responds. I assume they'll extend it, but we'll see. It'll also be interesting to see how they want to punish China or make China the fall guy in an election year. And now that last year when we talked about this, we talked about the risk of recession. Now nobody doubts we're in a recession. The latest numbers are that 33 million people have become unemployed. And there's an interesting article, if you read The Economist, about how are we going to live with only a 90% economy, which will be interesting. Someone asked about calling customs for classifications. So you can actually submit a request to customs to say, how should I classify my bag or product or whatever it is. The strategy there, it depends if you care. If you don't care what your classification is, you just say, here's my bag, here's all the descriptions, tell me what you think it is. Normally, you probably have a preference of how it's classified in order to save duties. And so usually it comes across as, I would help clients write an argument for here's why we think it's classified this way. Please advise. They can give you a binding ruling. You can accept it. You can even challenge it. Go from there. My experience with customs, is that you don't always get the most sophisticated answer. And so you kind of have to help them get to the sophisticated answer you want. And if they can't meet you there, then you got to elevate the issue and litigate over it. So, but in the meantime, you can get a ruling as to what they think it is. But I find it easy to help them. To give you an example, I recently did a product that had a circuit board in it. I had to explain to customs what was on the circuit board and how every item on the circuit board worked so they could tell which classification it was. And so sometimes that helps them. But yeah, there are so many products out there that don't fit into one easy category, and you can definitely get customs to help you. Or rather than getting a buying ruling, you can just choose what you want and go for it. Now, I mentioned earlier that if you change your classification, you risk an audit. I have a client right now that did that, and so instead of getting a binding ruling in advance, we're now arguing with customs about how to classify it. I do find that a binding ruling in advance is better than that, especially if you change categories for the same product in a way that will be easy for customs to detect. But you can try either way. You can get a binding rule in advance or just change it and see what happens. Let's see, looks like I missed another question. Someone has asked as a final point, are all ski and snowboard wear categories being monitored and reported on the SIA's website? Chris, do you have an answer to that? If not, we can certainly do so. I know that the SIA has been very active in certain categories in particular.
Yeah, we have all of the lists of all of the classifications on our website. So if you wonder, or if you need some more information on whether one of your products is listed on list 3 or list 4A, feel free to go on our website and take a look at those lists. As Joe had mentioned earlier, we're going to post the exemption lists early next week, and we'll send you all a note, an email to let you know when it's ready. But those classification lists are on our website.
Yeah, if that's that, I have no further comments for now, and no further questions, it seems. You'll enjoy reading the exclusion request because it's mind-boggling as to which ones got through and which ones didn't. And the best explanation seems to be either something important to the current administration or it looked like it was going to bankrupt a company, which is not necessarily encouraging, but it is but the good news is you can get products through, and we hope to get a lot of exclusions extended as well.
Well, Joe, thank you very much for doing this. We really appreciate it. And thank you all for joining this call. We hope you found it beneficial. We're going to continue to monitor the tariff situation as we have since 2018 on your behalf to keep you all posted on the developments with the tariff situation and how you can best develop strategies to benefit your business. If you have specific questions, go to our tariffs advocacy page on snowsports.org. Again, we're going to post the exclusion list on there early next week, and we'll send you a note. But a little caveat with that too is we don't know the specific details of every one of your products. So I would say that we'll do the best we can to assume that a ski jacket is a ski jacket. But if your products kind of fall between the lines of a ski jacket and another kind of jacket, then we're going to have to leave that up to you in terms of what category that might fall in. So just know that we'll do our best, but you might want to just double check internally. If you have any questions, please feel free to email us at info@snowsports.org, and we'll be in touch immediately. But also on the COVID issue, please visit our COVID Industry Hub for all the resources you need and a recording of today's discussion. It's going to be posted there this afternoon in case you want to re-listen to it. It's at snowsports.org/COVID Hub. We're going to have our next Thursday town hall is next Thursday, and it will build upon last week's consumer conversation titled "The Top 3 Actions You Must Implement in Your Business to Successfully Serve and Sell to the Evolving Consumer." Kristen Carpenter at Verde Brand Communications will discuss tactics and insights on how we must evolve with the consumer. So we'll be sending out a registration link very soon. So remember, all of us here at SA are here for you during this tough time. So please lean on us, and we'll get you through this, and we'll get together. We're going to be stronger because of it. So thank you very much, Joe, and thank you all for attending, and stay healthy and have a good day.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joe.